Are you a homeowner, African American who's looking to sell their home or looking to buy a home? And if so, are you looking to sell your home to another African American or Black American, or are you a buyer looking to buy a home exclusively from a Black American? Today, we're talking about real estate and should Black Americans and other folks of color, should they keep their home within the community? Joining me today on the offshoot is Troy Patterson. I'll let Troy introduce himself. He is a real estate expert, if you will, in the Washington, D.C. area. Troy, welcome to the offshoot.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Well, I'm very, very happy to have you. I know that you have a lot to share because we spoke a little bit before, and I wanted to kind of contain some of that information for this podcast. So let's jump right into it. But first, tell us about your firm and what you do for the buyers and sellers in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area.
All right. Well, I'm Troy Patterson. I'm with the Spera Group at TTR Sotheby's International Realty rather. The Spera Group is a small boutique firm. I'm one of the principals and founder. I guess I've been in this business coming up on 17 years. Started in this really because I found that I really enjoy helping connect families and people to homes, as well as helping people preserve potentially a family legacy. And I'll talk a lot. Some of the things I'll be talking about a lot is legacy, because it is for many families. This is grandmother's house or mother's house, and it was something that they worked very hard for. So it is maintaining a legacy for them. So, as you said, I work with buyers and sellers. Probably these days a bit more with sellers, but I do actually prefer working with buyers because there's something about being there when they find that right space and find that right home. So there's a connection that you build with people that is very gratifying.
So what is going on in the DC area or nationally when it comes to home ownership?
Well, nationally, we are still in a strong seller's market. The story across the country is inventory. There is a strong lack of inventory. However, with the rise in interest rates, we've actually seen some buyers who are not necessarily able to continue their search, or in many cases, they've been outbid. They've fought so many fights that they are just tired. So we're seeing some buyers fall off the market at the same time.
You getting
So
frustrated what you're saying?
that's the nationwide story. So home ownership has proven to be a great wealth builder. So a lot of people do want to make that happen. So for here in the DMV area, we are still in a strong seller's market. However, I would say that if we look at the affordability matrix, for what people are making in the district, we are still undervalued in terms of where homes could be priced. So people are making enough money to afford homes in their price point here, and there are still pockets in DC where you can find something good. You just have to, as we say, drive until you find the price, a property you like and the price that you like.
And are you referring to the population in general, or are you bringing it down between just like African American community versus white community?
So that is a distinction. We do that is the affordability matrix is based on population in general. As far as the demographics, we are not allowed, and it's somewhat illegal for us to actually talk in terms of racial demographics where these things are concerned. But DC does have a strong, well-educated and very highly paid African American population. By that same token, we've had families who have lived here for generations who are there is a large low income population here, and that is primarily
Okay.
in minority communities.
So what's happening with the minority communities, not just African American community, but Latino community, Asian community? Are we seeing them doing more buying, or are we seeing them doing more selling? And if we
Uh,
are, is it taking place in DC, or are they going out to the DMV Maryland?
Well, there's a mixture, and we don't have actual numbers in those regards specifically. But I will say that what we are anecdotally, we are seeing that there are families who are realizing that they're maybe sitting on a property that has a lot of value and might afford them to be able to buy a little further outside the city and buy something that's a bit nicer and actually build from there.
But doesn't that go to the legacy that you mentioned earlier? I mean, if you're going to create legacy with a home that is, say, two generations deep, uh, how did you maintain that? How does a family have legacy when they sell a home that's been in the family for two generations and they go out, take to Maryland, where it is cheaper and they can get a bigger home and more land?
Well, so the legacy necessarily isn't necessarily in the home, but as much as the equity in the home. So that equity can grow, can continue to grow. However, what I would say is that the if you are mindful of that, your parents or grandparents or even great grandparents purchased a property and kept it in the family for as long as they have experienced some growth. I'm sorry, at least some wealth building in that regard. And again, I have to be careful here.
Yeah,
But
understandable.
but there is value in potentially taking that legacy and being in a community that you find more to your liking, and a house that maybe newer, it may be bigger, but again, that's part of your equation that you have to look at.
So, in other words, uh, when we hear stories about people who wanted to keep their home black, I mean, they don't get into too many details, but they say, "Oh, my grandmother had this house, my mom had this house. We want to sell it, but we want to sell it to another black person." We know that's not legal, but am I hearing you correctly when you're saying that you can maintain that legacy in other ways as opposed to just keeping it in the house? You can, it's like you said, it's the equity,
Yes.
and that equity can continue do wealth building for the family.
And for me, I've been in Washington D.C. for 30, almost 38, almost 40 years, and I've seen various neighborhoods grow, and I've seen or change rather. So people are afraid of the gentrifying or the G word, if as we say, and that. Unfortunately, that is indicative of what's going on across many communities, especially in urban communities. So I don't necessarily think gentrification is a bad thing. I do. I've helped non-minority families buy into quote unquote black neighborhoods, and that is not an issue necessarily for me as something that is necessarily bad. What I would say is that when you come in and try to change the nature of that neighborhood. Or try to make changes, sort of as we saw in D.C. around the Georgia and you with the go-go plane. It was something that the community had been used to and had embraced for decades rather, and so for you to come in and then say,
You don't want hookah music in the neighborhood.
yeah, so that is a very different, and if that naturally goes based on the neighborhood, fine. But for someone to then come in and try to mandate that change, there's where I have an issue. And
That's the big difference. That's a very good argument that I don't have heard out there in terms of what's happening in cities like DC.
yes, and so it's so the neighborhood, the neighborhood makeup. I think we all benefit from having some diversity in our neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And I think for those families that can maintain their stake in a neighborhood, be it even if you take the equity out of that property and rent the grandma's house
Yeah.
and find a bigger place. I think that is an option that many people might choose. And if you are looking, we cannot necessarily say fair housing wise. I cannot say to a seller who in a black community say, here are the black people who have put in offers. But I can. But again, the family has to be aware of who is purchasing, in terms of whether they're going to be in that stay in that property, or if they're flipping it. So I think the real question in terms of gentrification these days is if you're selling to a corporation or to a builder or a wholesaler or someone who wants to flip that property, you miss out on in many cases some of that equity and that legacy.
Yeah.
If you if the house is if the house is worth, you get an offer for 500,000, but you know that house is going to be selling down the line after they put in 200,000. That house is then going to sell for 900,000. Figure out how you can be that builder in that instance. Become the person who reaps the benefit of that legacy.
But let's stay on this topic of legacy. I began this podcast when we talk about like home ownership, selling your home, keeping it in the community. But I'm more intrigued now about this idea of legacy, in that it being more than just keeping the home within the community or within the family.
Yes.
And so let's start with this first question. Are you seeing a lot of the corporate buyouts or developments of that happening in the DC area?
One of the big things that we did see across the country was corporations going in and buying out wholesale areas and then flipping them and then renting those properties out. So you've lost a base of homeowners who may have a stronger stake in a community than a renter. At the same time, they're renting these properties out. They're renting them at the highest possible number that they can get, because they are corporations. They are a business. That actually decreases the rental affordability in a community. So we're not necessarily seeing it as much in DC as we are seeing it maybe in the suburbs, or even further out in other parts of the country. So here again, rents are continuing to go up, and as people are considering whether or not they are going to purchase, the rise in interest rates has scared a lot of people. So I would say that actually now is the time to jump in and find a property while interest rates are still historically low, and take that. So if they're going to raise your rent every year by 6 to 10%, why not take that out of that equation out? This is what you can afford for rent. Find a house, and then that payment is going to be in place for 30 years. And you can maybe even down the line, if interest rates go back down, they may or may not, likely not. But if they do, you can then refinance down to a lower rate. Once you have more equity in the home, you can actually refinance to a lower rate at that point, based on the equity, not necessarily your FICO score, as it were.
Yeah. Well, here in Washington D.C., of course, we have a lot of homeowners. We have a lot of black homeowners, and like I said, whether it's the parent or the grandparent, these homes are now, like you said, are being sold at $500,000. Whoever comes in, puts some work into it, and sells it for $900,000. But you mentioned earlier about the family should be the developers themselves to try to create that legacy, and just in case they want to go, say, to Maryland or Virginia to buy a property, and then continue the legacy there. So how would you first advise one to look into something like that? How do you first advise, say,
and I get you. So there are some builders out there who will partner with the family. If you they will come in, do the work. You might have to you will likely have to move out, of the property. They will do the work, and you still own the property. And at that point, you make the decision. They put in the work, and you make the decision of whether or not you keep the property or you sell it. If you sell it, you pay them for their work, and if there's a partnership agreement, if it's 50% or versus or 75%, you work that out in the beginning. There are also companies now that we use as part of our white glove service at Sotheby's, and several other brokerages have this as well. We have companies that will come in, they will completely redo the work, redo the home. I had a family in Brentwood, Maryland, where we were going to put the property. They paid years ago. They paid under $200,000 for the property. We were going to put the property on the market for around $240,000. This company came in, put in $60,000 worth of work, which that is, it was not a huge renovation, but they came in, we put it on the market, and we ended up selling it for $375,000. So where they were going to get $240,000, they put $60,000 in, they got that $60,000 back plus an extra $75,000. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of legacy. They were able to then go across country and buy. They moved into Seattle, and they bought a much larger home, and because they had the funds in order to make a stronger down payment.
Yeah. But this sounds like knowledge that I don't think most people are aware of. I mean, I wasn't aware that that was something that could be done.
Yeah.
So should people start with someone like yourself, a realtor, if that's the path you want to go on? Because I asked that question because in neighborhoods like mine, there are only 88 single-family homes. A lot of the seniors, in the 80s, 90s, even in the centennials, they passed away.
Yeah. And
a lot of them didn't have any kids, or the siblings didn't want the home. Yeah. But I didn't know that this was an option for some of those families.
Yeah, and this is something, somewhat of a new phenomenon, I think, within the last 4 to 5 years that these companies have come about. So by that same token, they are, they are not cheap. So you want to make sure that you are that the work that they're doing, and I will say that the work is also very cookie cutter. It's a good word. So they're gonna do what's on trend. So it's gonna be a lot of white cabinetry, white countertops, gray paint, gray floors, things of that nature. So it's there's not a whole lot of room for individualization in those situations.
Okay, and so your firm is an agency that can help home sellers in this way?
Certainly, and part of my mission actually. I grew up in my parents married much too young and had 4 kids, and we were quote unquote poor. They took advantage of some home buyer programs and were able to buy their first home when I was in junior high. It was actually the home that they had been renting for years. So they bought it, fixed it up, then ended up selling it and building a house that we lived in for throughout my high school years. Then my mom decided that she wanted a broken down old home that she has been fixing up, and they sold the brand new home that they built, and my dad just follows around. But they took the equity in that home, and they were able to put 4 kids through college based. And so it was, for them, it was a building block.
Yes.
And that's what I encourage people to think, especially as young kids who are millennials and Generation X, Z, or I'm not sure. I'm X. As you're considering, think of it as a building block. So the first property might be a condo. Might be something small, might not be something that you consider a great home, but it's something that you own. So so one of we talked about this is that I typically see people when they are purchasing, when they're especially when they're purchasing their first home. I see them making a mistake of thinking it's going to be their forever home. They don't think in terms of the growth that comes from that. So for me, I think I was 31 when I bought my first house here in the district. So that was over 25 years ago. So the first place I bought was and this is typical. I bought a 2-bedroom house. I paid I paid like 155K for it. Then my partner and I bought an investment property, paid around around 350 for that. Our next home that we bought, and I used the equity in my first property to buy, and we paid 500 for that. Sold that for 750.
Wow.
That was too much house for me, and I'm in a condo now that I own outright, so I don't have any mortgage payment anymore. So, and that's typical for most people is that they buy, they buy the first home for them and the spouse. Then they buy the home for slightly bigger home that might be for them and a couple of the kids, and then they buy the large. This is what do they call? Do they even say flossing anymore? The house that they want everyone to see that they've made it, and then most people after they have the big house, they downsize into something smaller, so that is more manageable as they get to a certain age.
Let me ask you a question. Let me push back a little bit on that. Is that possible today? Like what the path that you took, is that possible today for anyone, whether no matter the background? And second, there are people that I know who the first home, a young couple, their first home here in DC was $800,000.
Yeah, that's no joke. That's no joke. So it is about partnering, and I think I had friends when they bought their first properties, they went in with a friend, someone who was very close, and typically if you are looking at properties, likely one of your peers is as well. So I've seen people who buy a property together, and then one might buy the other out, and stay in the property, or they sell it outright and split the proceeds. You just want to make sure that over time that you are making sure that you're both contributing equally to upkeep as well as maintenance, and upkeep as well as making monthly payments and utilities and all that, that there's an equal partnership in that regard, so that when you do, when it does come time to part ways in that regard, you want to make sure that there's no animosity in that regard. Because someone I paid to have the roof fixed and you didn't do anything for that.
Yeah.
But we have to start, because pricing is so high, and historically we have not, the African American community might not have the family to provide a down payment, or actually have the income starting out that some other communities might have. So we have to think in different ways to make things happen.
And what about with programs like with my first property years ago? It's a 1-bedroom on top of the hill.
Mhm.
I sold that property at the right time and was going to get a house. And I bought a fixer-upper house.
Yeah.
And I got a very, very good deal.
Mhm.
And I put some money into it. And of course, now I'm very happy with what we are at the moment.
Yeah.
But then again, I don't think that what I went through, I don't think my process is even available to most people out there, regardless of their background, African American, white, Latino, Asian, what have you. So I warned about Gen Z, like you mentioned earlier, or millennials. Are they able to do what we did? I mean,
There are still programs out there. I encourage people to go to a website called downpaymentresources.com. That actually is a national aggregate of down payment assistance programs, and you feed your information in. It'll ask you questions about your income, where you live, what kind of work you do, because there are still programs out there. And there are programs similar to say if you're a teacher, work in medicine or law enforcement or firefighters, there are community hero programs. Unfortunately, those houses don't come up very often, so you have to be very much willing to go where those houses are. So that would be the only thing that I would be caution about. A fixer-upper, sometimes you just have to be willing to put in a little sweat equity to get to get the home that you want. It's going in thinking you're going to get this fabulous place right off the bat. Is that's sort of like those of us who you're going to end up house poor. Those of us who
Yeah.
go out and buy a Mercedes for our first car, thinking, oh, this is great, but you're spending all this money.
Home maintenance.
Or just spending money on a car that is more for show than for actual, you're going to get the same function as if you'd gone out and bought a let's say a Toyota.
Yes.
All
Yes.
right.
Well, on that note, I hope people take that advice. Is there anything else before we end that you want to share with those looking to sell their home or buy a home?
Well, I'm certainly here to provide advice. My team as well. We a huge aspect for us is helping people and maintaining communities. Sorry about that. Thought I turned off. Maintaining our communities and maintaining those legacies, so that your families have worked hard for.
Yes. But
All right.
everyone, there you have it. Troy, thank you again for joining me on the Offshoot.
All right.
For the audience, please be sure to go to YouTube and subscribe to this channel and like the video. Leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to get some feedback. Also, check out the website at www.theoffshoot.org and check me out on Twitter. Troy, again, thank you, and I hope to have you back.
All right. I'd love to be back. All right.
Thank you, and you have a good one.
You too. All right.